Okay, now we have Arnoldo Rodriguez up there to talk about our block grant.
Mayor, members of the council, Arnoldo Rodriguez, Development Services Director. The one thing that the high school students are missing is that they would have received extra credit for hearing my presentation. So it looks like there's probably still a few out there. So maybe they can come back. Yeah, right.
Yeah, those are the ones.
So the item before you, it's just an overview of the city's community block development program, and staff is also requesting direction from the council this evening in terms of how funds are allocated for the upcoming 2017-2018 CDBG funding program. For background purposes, the city of Yuba City is an entitlement city, and what that entails is that the city is eligible for grant dollars from HUD. Last year, we received approximately $580,000, and it does run on a fiscal year, so the funds are generally allocated beginning July the 1st, which runs through June the 30th of the following year. The entitlement city portion of it, or component of it, it's based on needs and the city's demographics. There are some communities that are of our size that receive say less dollars in comparison to Yuba City. There's comparable cities to Yuba City that receive less funds in comparison to Yuba City. So again, it's all based on needs and the local demographics. The intent of the program is to provide decent housing, a suitable living environment, and to expand economic opportunities, primarily for low and moderate income persons. As part of the CDBG program, there is a 5-year report that the city has to submit to HUD, and that's called the Consolidated Plan. What the Consolidated Plan discusses is it outlines the city's strategies for the next 5 years in terms of how those funds will be allocated. So as the annual grant becomes available, the city's programs have to fall within one of the umbrella programs of the Consolidated Plan. The Consolidated Plan that we're currently operating under was adopted in 2015, and that runs through 2020. On top of the Consolidated Plan, there are 2 annual reports that the city has to submit to HUD. Every year around May time, the city prepares an action plan. What the action plan entails or consists of is it outlines the program activities that the city is going to be using the HUD funds for the upcoming year. So in probably the end of April, beginning of May, city staff will be returning to city council for direction for the 2017-2018 annual action plan. The CAPER report is the second annual report that city staff has to prepare and submit to HUD. What the CAPER entails is it articulates what the funds were spent for the previous year. So in September, we'll be returning back to the city council and we'll be outlining a report that describes how the funds for 2016-2017 were spent. In terms of allocating the funds themselves, the city does have discretion in terms of how we allocate the funds. There's a plethora of guidelines from HUD. It's an enormous document. However, within that document, again, we do have some discretion. However, activities generally have to include housing activities, rural property investments, economic development, and then the program and administration. There is a cap for the program administration of 20%. So last year, for example, the city received roughly $580,000. The maximum that can be spent on the administration of the program would be roughly $104,000. And then also public services. The public services has a cap of 15%, and I'm going to dive into that in 2 slides. Oh, thank you, Terrell. So, for example, last year, or the current fiscal year that we're in, the city received approximately $580,000. Of that, the city had allocated roughly 18% for the administration cost. Public services was 15%. It's simply due to rounding numbers. I believe it says 14%. Facility improvements was 67%, again for a total of $601,000. The reason that it shows $601,000 versus the $580 is in some of the activities, they're actually paid for from the previous year. So there were some carry over dollars from the previous fiscal year. However, with that being said, our total budget allocation was $580,000. Historically, in terms of public services, so public services largely entail programs where the city serves as the fiscal agent for subrecipient grants. The subrecipient grants have historically gone towards organizations that provide some form of assistance to people experiencing temporary homelessness, or a lot of our local veterans programs. Historically, the city has attempted to maximize the full 15% for the program. Again, that's not the minimum, rather that's the maximum. So there are a lot of great programs in our local community. I'm absolutely confident that if we can provide them 25% of our total allocation, we probably would. However, there is a cap of 15%. Historically, again, we have given the full 15%, and as the overhead shows, this goes back to 2012. I'm sorry, to 2013, which was roughly $74,000, and again, last year was approximately $90,000. In the fiscal year, we allocated about $84,000, but again, some of those were slightly carryover figures from the previous fiscal year. So a couple of slides ago, I think it was slide 5, I stated that HUD does allow local jurisdictions some discretion with how those funds are allocated. With that being said, HUD has informed the city that they have some preferred programs that they would strongly encourage the city to explore or to focus in terms of how the resources are allocated. For example, one of the messages that we received is that HUD prefers that smaller subrecipient grants be consolidated, and specifically those would be for the public service programs that we described, which historically have targeted people experiencing temporary homelessness. And then the second thing that HUD has expressed to us is that they favor facility improvements versus public service activities. So again, the public service activities does have a cap on it of 15%. However, from HUD's perspective, they haven't necessarily told us we shouldn't be spending 15% on that. However, again, they actually do favor public facilities, for example, real estate improvement enhancements, or sidewalk improvements, or things of that nature. In response to HUD, staff is proposing this year to actually have a minimum grant application. So the floor would be a minimum of $5,000 for subrecipient grants. That $5,000 floor again would apply to the public service component of the grant, which again would be a maximum of 15% of our entire allocation. And secondly, we are strongly recommending that subrecipient grants collaborate on like programs with the goal of eliminating duplicative efforts. One of the challenges that we have is that while we have excellent agencies here in our local community, there are a couple of agencies that perform what we would probably consider, from HUD's perspective, like services. And so one of the things that we've been doing since last year is we've been meeting with some of the subrecipients to encourage them to join forces or to collaborate to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts, because while $85,000 sounds like a big pot of money, when you're serving a relatively large area such as ours, it's probably not enough to go around. And again, the goal simply being is to eliminate duplicative efforts, and at the same time to try to minimize our administrative cost over the long run. And that was in direct response to HUD. So with that being said, staff is requesting that the council direct staff to give primary consideration to homeless support services for community funding request. Again, that would be the public service activities, with the caveat being, of course, that the maximum that we can allocate to that would be the 15%. And second, that the subrecipients, that we make every effort to consolidate funding awards to fewer providers to provide a range of homeless support services. So with that being said, that concludes staff's presentation.
Any comments or questions from my fellow council members?
Through the mayor.
Yes.
Hate to be the only one talking tonight. Mr. Rodriguez, in my conversations with former Secretary Castro, and I had these conversations a number of times last year by telephone with him and with staff members of the prior White House administration, The focus from HUD was that possibly the money would be utilized in not multiple $5,000 increments,
Correct.
but in larger components that would also serve not just the homeless component, but they also have an emphasis on veteran homelessness at HUD. So I don't know what the current administration is looking at. I have no idea what the changes at HUD will be going forward, but I can only imagine that they'll stay probably somewhat in line with that, as there's been a focus to generally try to reduce homelessness and certainly make an impact with our veteran component of homelessness. So my encouragement would be that the grants not be limited just to that, but that we look at large allocations to have a direct impact on providing services to that section of our community.
Okay, thank you.
No other comments? Looking for a motion?
I'll move the staff's recommendation.
I'll second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Seeing none, it's a unanimous vote.